It was only a question. Simple, respectful, soft, but in a world that rushes along and doesn't listen, even a question can become a storm. He didn't come to cause a scene, no sensationalism, no melodrama, just one man with a vow in his back pocket and a tale etched in silence, not screams. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't count until you held your ground and everything changed? Have you ever seen respect, so readily forgotten, become something worth fighting over? This is the tale of what ensued next and what it meant, way beyond one missed plane. The early sun crept over Hollywood Burbank Airport, stretching long golden shadows over the deserted runway. John Nye Kennedy emerged from a nondescript black car, his boots hitting the ground with a gentle, even thud. His pace was slow, measured even, with the calm that comes with years of living, not running. He was outfitted in plain clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the top, and a navy blue jacket draped over one shoulder. A well-worn canvas duffel bag, the sort that had obviously accumulated its share of tails, hung from his left hand. A neatly folded American flag was tucked into his coat pocket, its folds neat, the material softly worn from years, but tended with respectful quiet. This was not a political visit or a public outing. This was personal. John was traveling to Boise, Idaho, for a private memorial, a subdued farewell to an old friend. Not any friend, but the one who never remembered how you took your coffee, even after all those years. The one friend who did not blink when things got tough. The ceremony wasn't large, just family and close friends. But John had offered to come, to say a few words, not for the attention, but because when somebody counts, you appear. No questions asked. The morning breeze was cool, flavored with the subtle smell of jet fuel and sun-kissed asphalt. As John approached the terminal, he observed the thrum of travelers behind the glass walls, families balancing strollers and bags, business travelers nervously punching their phones, college students with backpacks slung over one shoulder. Life in transit. He navigated the hubbub with quiet confidence, not wishing to attract attention, but not shrinking either. His silver hair shone, thick and combed back, and his face was creased with the sort of lines that don't beg attention. They earn it. The check-in queue at Phoenix Western Airlines curled around a couple of velvet ropes. John fell into position, his duffel bag on the ground beside him, boarding pass and ID already in his possession. He wasn't a chatty person, but he gave the frazzled woman behind him a nod of kindness, who was trying to manage a toddler and a diaper bag. The line crept ahead, that glacial, plodding pace airports are renowned for. But John didn't puff and check his watch. He'd endured too many airports, too many delays, to squander energy on annoyance. Then he moved forward to the counter. The ticket agent, young, perhaps early 20s, buzz cut and name tag reading Josh, didn't take the time to look up initially. His keyboard was positioned on a half-full cup of coffee, the paper sleeve smudged with a ring of brown. John pushed his ID boarding pass across the counter, his California driver's license a bit worn, but perfectly readable. Josh took one glance at it before looking John up and down the way people do when they're trying to guess at you quickly and likely getting it wrong. No smile, no hello, just a few pecks at the keyboard, a tiny frown creasing. "You're not in the system," Josh said flatly, like he'd said the same words to a dozen people that morning already. John tilted his head slightly, calmly. "Try again," he said. Not confrontational, just clear. His voice had a quiet gravity, the kind that didn't need to get loud to be heard. Josh let out a sigh that he said he'd already decided this was a hassle. His fingers danced impatiently across the keys. "Nope, still not there," he said, finally looking up, his arms crossed over his chest like a barrier. "You'll need to step aside, sir. I've got other passengers to check in." John didn't budge. He rested his hands lightly on the counter, eyes steady. "Mind telling me why I'm not in the system?" he asked, calm and firm. It wasn't a demand. It was a request with weight. Josh's jaw tightened. He waved over a coworker, a woman with a clipboard and a lanyard, who approached with robotic efficiency. "Can you verify this guy's boarding pass?" Josh asked, handing over the papers without even glancing at John. The woman, her name tag was Karen, swiped the pass, entered something on the computer, and after a second said, "He's flagged. Random review. Full recheck." Josh shrugged like it was nothing unusual. "Yeah, you'll need to step aside, sir," he repeated, his voice just a little stiffer now, the kind of tone people use when they know the rule book is on their side. John raised one eyebrow, not dramatically, just enough to say, "Really? Flagged for what?" he asked, each word slow and clear, like ripples breaking across a quiet pond. Josh did not respond. His arms remained crossed. Sir, if you don't, we'll call security. John gave a small, thin smile. Not smug, just familiar. He'd witnessed this before. Folks wielding their little wedge of power like a club, not because they needed to, just because they could. I asked a question, John said. All calm as you please. That's not refusing. Behind him, the woman with the little boy leaned over to her husband and spoke softly, her eyes darting toward John. Is that? She began, but her husband shook his head, not knowing. Josh didn't appear to have even heard or cared. Please move over, he said again, this time more insistently. He was finished talking, and so John went away. Not because he was scared, but because he knew something Josh did not. When you abuse your power, the best thing to do is let you, in silence, let you march straight into the chaos you are creating. From the pocket of his coat, John produced another bit of identification, a veteran's card. The edges were worn to smoothness, the official stamp a trifle faded, but the significance unmistakable. He extended it, not to convince, not to brag, just to say wordlessly the reality of who he was. Josh hardly glanced at it. ID doesn't supersede protocol, he said briskly, as though it were a line he'd rehearsed. John did not protest. He did not shout or insist. He merely stood there, his hands slid back into his pockets, his stance loose but immovable, unflappable like a boulder in a river. Outside of him, the machine churned onward. The line crept forward. Some travelers shot him a look, confused or irritated, frustrated at the delay. Others ignored him. The terminal was abuzz with the sounds it always made, the faraway hum of the intercom, the low roll of suitcase wheels, and the infrequent boarding call ringing overhead. He checked his flight to Boise. Boarding would start soon. He glanced up at the screen. The gate number flashed brightly. On time. He considered why he was flying, about the little memorial that awaited him in Boise, about the vow he'd made to a daughter mourning her father. He'd promised to speak a few plain, sincere words, words that would do justice to the kind of man who showed up when it counted. That reflection centered him, focused him on what counted now. Two TSA agents suddenly materialized at the counter. Their radios hummed quietly as they moved. They were neither hurrying nor unworried. That in-between gait that says, "We've already decided." "Sir, we need you to accompany us," said one of them. The man had a buzz cut and a badge on his belt. John regarded him steadily, his tone as even as ever. "For what?" "Random screening," said the officer curtly. Well-rehearsed tone, one that sounded like he'd uttered it 100 times and never been questioned before. "Please don't complicate this further than it already is." John didn't fight back. He just leaned forward, handing over his boarding pass and veteran's ID again, slowly, like an invitation to come closer. But they didn't. The second officer, a woman with her dark hair pulled tightly back, stepped forward. "Sir, we're not asking," she said. Her voice carried the same subtle threat Josh had used earlier, polite on the surface, but cold underneath. John's jaw set, not in anger, but in quiet recognition. He'd seen this before. This wasn't about safety. This was about someone making a snap judgment, about someone deciding without a word that he didn't matter. He thought of his friend, of the folded flag he'd put in his coat, of the family he'd leave behind in Boise. He shut his eyes tight, drew a deep, slow breath through his nostrils, and then, without saying a word, he followed after them. They took him through a silent side door, out of the throngs of people, down a thin gray linoleum-lined hallway illuminated by buzzing fluorescent bulbs. There was a faint smell of disinfectant and stale airport coffee in the air. The walls were white and empty, except for some curled posters regarding TSA procedure. A third officer intercepted them halfway. Ausokin muttered something to the rest, too soft to make out, but the tone all too recognizable, defensive, self-excusing, the way people speak when they realize they're pushing too hard but can't bring themselves to admit it. The head officer addressed John. "Full pat-down will be required," he said. "Your bag will be X-rayed apart." John met him straight in the eye, unflappable, unblinking. "No explanation? No likely cause?" he inquired. "Just me?" The officer adjusted uncomfortably, hand resting by his radio. "You can complain later, sir," he answered, sidestepping the question like an old habit. John shook the head slightly, voice dry but not ungentle. "I'm sure you say that a lot." The search commenced. It was clinical, detached, the type of procedure that didn't produce a sense of protection. It produced a sense of control. John remained immobile, arms extended, as hands swept across his shoulders, down his ribs, ruffled his pockets without concern. His boots were removed and set upon a chilly metal table like evidence. His bag, meticulously packed that morning, was opened and searched. The creased flag poked out from beneath his jacket, its stars reflecting a small amount of cold fluorescent light. John just pushed it back out of sight. No one questioned it, and he didn't tell them, because that, he knew, was the whole point. They weren't searching for something. They were making a point that at this moment, in this quarter, he wasn't a veteran, wasn't a man with something to keep, wasn't anything more than a name on a list, just another body to be processed. Time crawled. Minutes ticked by. The sound of the terminal receded behind him. John glanced down at his watch, a simple, leather-strapped one with an old-fashioned face. The hands had passed his flight's boarding time. Still, he didn't speak, didn't argue, because he knew the rules here. Speaking up wouldn't change a thing. Eventually, the officers stepped back. "You're clear," one of them said. No apology, no explanation, just a nod toward the door. John slowly repacked his bag, systematically, as if he were sewing himself back together. His coat was rumpled now. His boarding pass creased from too much handling. He tossed the duffel back onto his shoulder and headed out through the sliding glass doors. Back into the terminal, back into the commotion and hubbub. He raised his eyes. The gate number remained posted, but the status had been updated. Flight 1423 departed. He stood for a second, gazing at the screen. Not bitter, not angry, just immovable. He'd promised. He wouldn't be able to keep it. He pulled out his phone and sent a soft text to his friend's daughter. "Missed the flight. Sorry." Then hit send, popped the phone back in his pocket, and remained there, immovable. The world around him continued to spin, people hurrying, speakers blaring, children laughing and sobbing. But to John, it had all been reduced to this instant, a moment of loss, of silent rebellion. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something within him had realigned, a stillness in the tightening of his chest, the kind that says, this isn't just about me. It was about all who had ever been dismissed, brushed aside, treated as though they didn't exist. And while he stood there, some of the passengers began to notice. Their eyes lingered a fraction of a second longer. Some of them lifted their phones, discreetly curious. Something in the atmosphere was different. The story, though John had no idea at this point, was already in the process of spreading. He stood under the dim airport lights, boots back on, but somehow heavier now. Not from wear, but from weight. His duffel bag lying beside him, somewhat mussed from the search, and the flag in his coat lying gently against his chest. A silent reminder of the promise he could not fulfill. The officers had discovered nothing. No reason, no explanation. And John was left with nothing but what he'd arrived with, plus a silence that now seemed louder than anything. It wasn't about the weight any longer. It was about a man who stood still and posed a question nobody would ever answer. John's eyes stayed locked on the lead officer as he took a slow step back, radio crackling with static. "You're free to go," the officer said flatly, like the last 20 minutes hadn't cost John a flight, and a moment he couldn't get back. No apology, no explanation, just a nod toward the door. John did not stir immediately. He readjusted his coat, smoothing out the material with a quiet reverence. His fingers touched the edge of the folded flag safely nestled in his pocket. He was not upset visibly, but the tightness in his jaw spoke louder than words. Something within him had changed. The officers looked at each other for the first time, unbored and not smug, but unsure, as if they could feel that something had shifted, although they didn't know what. The corridor around them was a neglected segment of the airport, thin, beige-gray linoleum beneath their feet, a lone rolled-up sign telling passengers what not to bring. John grabbed his duffel, settling it onto his shoulder with the same deliberate quiet he'd moved by all morning. Then he headed for the door. His footsteps were silent but insistent, ringing only softly down the deserted corridor. Outside, however, the terminal came to life. The sound came back in full, suitcases clattering across tile, voices rising, announcements crackling overhead. But where John strode, time was different, slower. He walked as though he weren't just entering a terminal, but through the gravity of something intangible. He remembered Boise, of the words he had wanted to say. Plain words, not pretentious, but significant. The kind you say when you're celebrating a friend who'd shared a thermos of coffee on a cold night in a distant place neither of you wanted to recall. He'd promised to be there for that friend's family, a promise that counted. And now that promise had been shattered, not by mistake, but by a system that had regarded him not as an individual, but as a box to be checked on a screen. Just another name, just another nuisance. His grip on the strap of the bag squeezed a little tighter, not from rage, but from that dawning realization. This wasn't about him. It was about each individual ever to be overlooked, each question left unasked, each second stolen by someone who hid behind the phrase of just following procedure. The counter at Phoenix Western Airlines continued to move while he was coming out. The line of passengers continued to advance. Josh, the young ticket agent who had initially opened the door to this, was once again at his computer. He was typing furiously, not even giving a glance in the direction of the hall where John had just exited. Karen, the other agent, was seen nowhere, probably redistributed, or possibly just taking a break to get out of the tension. John didn't head to the counter. He lingered quietly beside a column, eyes moving through the terminal. Around him, normal life continued. A young couple fought over a missed flight. An older woman wrestled with her carry-on. A man in a blazer stabbed angrily at his laptop, annoyed with the Wi-Fi. Ordinary people, ordinary lives, all trapped in the same system that had just taken away his morning. His phone vibrated, a new text from his friend's daughter. "We get it. Have a safe trip." The words were gracious, and they hurt, not on her account, but because of what they implied. He'd failed her, not through option, but still. It ached in that soft, heavy fashion that defies explanation. As he pocketed the phone again, he saw a young woman standing there. Her phone was partially turned toward him. Her thumb hovered above the screen. She wasn't covert about it, but John knew she was recording. Her eyes repeatedly darted back and forth, toward him, then away, like she didn't know if she should do anything. He didn't flinch, didn't respond, but he knew. He'd witnessed it before, how a fleeting moment could spread out when someone decided to document it. He didn't know her name, her history, but he could surmise why she was recording. Something about what had just transpired, being escorted away by officers, his measured refusal to be disrespected, had hit a chord. She wasn't alone in observation. A man with a baseball cap hovered at the edge, phone in hand, half concealed, but filming as well. His expression one of curiosity and unease. John didn't pose, didn't perform. He simply stood. And in that stood, there was enough, a still presence in a room that hadn't anticipated being shaken. A firm reminder that dignity doesn't have to yell. Above him, the screen flickered once more. Flight 1523 departed. His gaze rested on those red letters for a second, then slowly returned to the counter. Josh was scanning in a new passenger now, typing more quickly than before. Nervous, perhaps, attempting to move on. John moved forward. His stride was slow, calculated. The duffel moved loosely against his hip. The line had grown smaller, and when Josh's eyes met his face went pale just a little. "Sir, I can reschedule," Josh hurried to say, his tone softer now, guarded, as if he was hoping to paper over what had gone down. John put his bag down, leaned forward slightly on the counter. His eyes didn't flicker. "I asked you a question a while back," he said, tone low and even, each word distinct and firm, like ripples in calm water. "You didn't reply. You called security instead. Why?" Josh stopped, moving. His fingers froze on the keyboard. I thought you were being stubborn," he stuttered. His voice broke like he wasn't accustomed to being held responsible. John's eyebrow twitched fractionally, unfazed, unruffled. "Being curious about why my seat was switched isn't stubborn," he said. "Escalating for no reason is." The air in front of the counter appeared to ripple. The terminal noise receded into a soft buzz. Travelers moving down the corridor slowed, hesitantly tilting their heads. Pricking up something was occurring. Josh shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted left and right, hoping to see Karen or another person intervene. No one moved. John did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His presence, calm, collected, unflappable, did him the trick. It was the sort of presence that made silence itself something powerful. "You pulled me over for a random stop," John went on. "But it wasn't random, was it?" His tone remained calm, but now it was sharper, concentrated. "You determined I was an issue because I had a question." He left that to hang there for a second. "That's not procedure. That's pride." Josh's face hardened, his jaw locked, and the heaviness of John's words hung on. Josh did not respond. He did not need to. The truth hung between them, silent, crisp, and inescapable. John pulled his veteran's ID out of his coat again. He held it aloft, not as a brag, but merely to be noticed, to be perceived. "This means something," he repeated, his voice even, subdued but resolute. "Not because of who I am, but because of what it represents. You didn't even glance at it." There was no time for Josh to answer before a man rushed out of a side office. His lanyard bounced with each step, and his jacket, tight shoulders, projected the appearance of someone attempting a bit too strongly to appear authoritative. His name badge said Mark. "Is there a problem here?" he snapped hastily, looking between Josh and John with a short tone. John spun toward him. His face still hadn't changed. "There was a problem," he answered calmly. "Your employees made a simple question an altercation, disregarded legitimate ID, held me up for no good reason, and I missed my flight. That's not a problem, that's a failure." Mark blinked, obviously taken aback. His hands tightened on the clipboard in his hand. "Sir, I'm positive we can fix this," he said, his tone too oily, as if he were already attempting to sweep this under the rug. "We can put you on the next flight, first class, free." John shook the head, a small movement. "One done." "This isn't about a seat," he explained. "It's about respect. You don't address that by upgrading." The terminal was quieter now, or perhaps that's just the way people had ceased to pretend not to listen. The woman with the phone was still close at hand, camera still pointed at John. The man in the baseball cap had moved closer too, now openly recording. John didn't nod to them, but he understood what was occurring. The moment was no longer his. It was the world's. He remembered Boise again, the crevassed flag in his jacket, the family he was waiting for. He remembered the many other people who had stood in lines like this, posed simple questions, and been shrugged off, just because they didn't possess a name that carried authority. "I want a name," John blurted, eyes now fixed on Mark. His voice sliced through the din like a knife, level, smooth. "The name of the man who judged that I was a problem for inquiring." Mark paused, his hand around the clipboard tightened. "Sir, that's a personnel issue," he said, his own voice wavering. John edged a bit closer, not aggressive, just firm. "Disrespect is personal," he said, "and if you don't treat it that way, you are going to discover what accountability feels like." The words fell like a rock splashing in quiet water, not because he yelled, but because they were accurate. Mark's face grew harder. A tiny droplet of sweat formed just above his collar. Josh, who remained behind the counter, seemed as if he wished to vaporize. His fingers hovered helplessly over the keyboard. The woman with the phone lowered it slightly, her eyes wide, like she had just realized the gravity of what she was recording. Because the video, 20 seconds of John, standing unruffled and unbending, ringed by officers who wouldn't look him in the eye, was already going around, already being uploaded, shared by people who had seen something in it they'd experienced, something they'd felt too. The terminal air felt thicker. The moment had moved beyond the space. John reached for his duffel bag, his actions slow, calculated. Not like a defeated man, but like a finished one. He spun and moved toward the doors. The sliding glass slid open with a gentle hiss. Morning light poured onto his path as he emerged. Behind him, the terminal came to life. Whispers, sidelong glances, murmurs of the camera shutter. But the tale was no longer simply about a flight missed. It had evolved. It had become something greater, something deeper, something that resonated in the still places where dignity so frequently goes unspoken. The Hollywood Burbank Airport glass doors slid closed behind John Knight Kennedy. The soft whoosh disappeared behind him as he stood just outside, his canvas duffel at his feet. Morning air was cooler now, sweeping over his face, the creased American flag still against his chest. And though it hadn't altered, it felt heavier, not because of weight, but because of significance. The promise it represented, the one he couldn't hold up. Above him, the sun continued higher in the sky that threw strong shadows on the pavement. In the distance, a jet roared into the air, a flight heading somewhere else. Boise was in his wake now. The memorial, the words he'd intended to speak, would remain unspoken. His expression was inscrutable. His jaw clenched, his eyes squarely on the horizon. He wasn't mad, not the kind most would anticipate. It was something more profound, a silent form of resolve, one that doesn't require screaming to be heard. In the house, the tale he left behind was still spreading, ripples faster than anyone could manage. That clip, those 20 silent seconds, was already up on the internet, already started to make its way, one monitor at a time, spread by strangers who knew what they were witnessing, who recognized what he had. It wasn't about John anymore. It was about him standing his ground, about him demanding to be treated like human being, about him not allowing disrespect to conceal itself within protocol. And now that moment, unvarnished and true, had ignited to a spark. It was illuminating dialogue well outside the confines of the airport. In a break room in the back of the counter, the mood had shifted as well. Josh slumped in a plastic chair, his head down, his hands clenched together in his lap. His name badge lay on the table, the pin twisted from being removed too quickly. Mark loomed there, jacket open, clipboard abandoned. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and silent regret. "You could have just responded to his question," Marcus said, low-voiced. Not in anger, just exhausted. Josh did not look up. "I had no idea who he was," he mumbled, almost a whisper. Mark shook his head slowly, arms crossed. That's the point, he said. You don't need to know someone's name to treat them like a person. The silence that came after was heavy. It wasn't the kind of silence John had used so effectively. This was the silence that creeps in when you realize you've made a mistake you can't take back. Josh's eyes remained on the ground, his face ashen. He could not yet sense the internet shifting its focus onto him, but the transition had commenced already, and Mark was aware of it. Something was brewing just behind the walls. Outside, John slowly approached a bench in front of the taxi stand. His pace was serene, measured, the same consistent beat he'd maintained all morning. He put down his bag and sat, putting his hands on his knees, eyes sweeping the crowded parking lot. His phone vibrated in his pocket over and over, a constant parade of notifications. He hadn't looked at them. He didn't have to. He could already hazard a guess as to what they were. Texts from friends, coworkers, perhaps even strangers. Response to the video that was now making the rounds on the internet. He didn't touch any of them. Instead, he pulled out of his coat the creased American flag. He held it carefully as if handling something delicate. His fingers followed its edges, well worn through time. It was for his friend's family, a silent act of remembering, something intimate, something that should have been given in person. The idea of the memorial, the family together without him, clutched at his chest, but he didn't allow it to sit there too long. John had learned a long time ago, regret can only become a burden if you allow it to define you. Instead, he focused on the greater picture. To the individuals who had had experiences like his, individuals who were forgotten, ignored, or treated as if they didn't exist. Not because they'd done anything bad, but because some individual with a badge or behind a desk chose to look the other way. In the terminal, the tale was already spreading. The young woman who'd recorded the video, her name was Mia, a student, had put it on the internet with a brief message. This is the kind of treatment people receive at Burbank Airport. He just asked a question. In the brief video clip, John was quiet, unflustered, as TSA officials escorted him off. His voice didn't waver. The officials' responses, on the other hand, were abrupt, deflective. That contrast spoke louder than words could, and people were reacting quickly. Comments flooded in, not only from locals, but from nationwide, even worldwide. Something similar occurred to my father at LAX. I was stopped for appearing sleepy. I hadn't even woken up yet. The anecdotes would have been small, bland, but they were potent because they were ubiquitous. These weren't high-level scandals or front-page news. They were small-time slights that accumulated, that drained people of their energy, and now they were being noticed. In Phoenix Western Break Room, the phone on Mark's belt vibrated. A text from the regional manager flashed on the screen. "Call me, now." He came out, tension evident in his jaw. The storm had broken. The airline's social media department was already scrambling to craft a statement that would not accept responsibility, but could potentially stem the anger. Something ambiguous, something safer. Mark came back into the break room, his face grim. "It's out there," he said quietly. Josh looked up, puzzled. "What is?" Mark didn't answer right away. He pulled up the video on his phone and played it silently. Grainy footage showed John asking his calm question, the officer's sharp reply, the quiet moment when he said, "This isn't about protocol, this is about pride." The words hit differently now, surrounded by thousands of comments, a rising wave of people saying, "I've been there too." Josh's face drained of color. "I didn't mean," he began, but the words ran out. There wasn't really a defense to be made. Not now. He hadn't been mean-spirited, he'd just been careless. And now that carelessness was a reflection, a mirror to consequences he hadn't been expecting. Outside, John finally opened his phone. He didn't scroll far. One message caught his eye, a text from his friend's daughter. "We saw the video. Dad would have been proud of how you handled it." John read it twice. He didn't want the praise, but it counted, not for pride, but for reassurance that he hadn't failed them entirely. The memorial hadn't gone as he'd wished. It still wasn't, though. But that moment, was accomplishing something else now, something more. The video, now viewed by thousands, was speaking for the silent. A nurse who was scanned without reason, a veteran whose credentials were disregarded, a mother who'd been hurried past security as if she was an annoyance. Their words, plain, truthful, were piling up. John had not wanted to be a symbol. He still didn't, but he got it now. There are times when one moment, dealt with quiet courage, can be louder than 1,000 arguments. It can halt people, make them think, remind them of something we often forget. Respect is not gained with a title. It's owed to everyone. The break room was filled. 12 staff members crowded around a folding table, expressions a combination of nervousness, guilt, and defensiveness. "We need to talk," Mark started. His tone was firm yet weary. "The video's out there. People are seeing it. We can't deny it happened." Karen, the agent who had ordered John to be searched at random, shifted in her seat uncomfortably. "It was just protocol," she replied, her voice cautious. Mark shook his head. "Protocol doesn't include shutting a person down for inquiring. Protocol doesn't include calling security because you feel threatened." The room grew still. His words hung in the air, repeating something John had uttered himself. "People pass through here by the hundreds every day," Mark went on, softer now. "Each one of them has a story, a purpose for being here, and we don't get to choose who deserves to be here and who doesn't." The resulting silence was thicker than any tantrum. Josh, who had been sitting in the back, didn't say anything. He merely looked at his hands. Outside, John stood, slung his duffel over one shoulder, and began toward the taxi stand. The driver, a grizzled older man with a well-worn cap, recognized him at once but kept silent, simply opened the door and stood aside with a deferent nod. John got in, the city spilling out beyond the window as the taxi moved away. The airport, glass walls, crowd din, receded behind him. He thought of Boise, of the family still waiting, of the flag folded and secure in his coat pocket. He'd get it to me another day. He thought of the video, of the millions it had touched, of the silent way it gave other people permission to speak about what they'd lived through. John didn't want the attention, never did. But he knew what it was. One moment of calm bravery could accomplish what outrage couldn't. It might cause individuals to stop, listen, and recall a straightforward truth. Respect is not gained, it is due. Not once a name is known, not once credentials are verified. From the start, always. John had remained motionless, posed an equitable query, and refused to be waved away. And now, through phones and monitors, others were also remaining in place. Educators, parents, travelers, veterans. Their tales weren't sensationalized, they were genuine, and they counted. John's moment was theirs now, a reminder that even the smallest gesture of dignity could resonate in spaces where it had been too long forgotten. And that, greater than any flight or monument, was a promise worth holding on to. Sometimes life doesn't leave us with great moments to demonstrate who we are. It leaves us with tiny ones. A canceled flight, a quiet question, a choice to remain calm while everything else seems so unjust. And it's in the moments, the silent ones, that our character is shown. We may not always have a choice as to how we're treated, but we do get to choose how we react. And sometimes simply standing your ground with dignity can speak louder than 1,000 words ever could. We all have days when we're treated like we're invisible or ignored, as if our own story isn't important. But stories such as this one remind us that dignity is not based on the way other people treat us. It's based on the way we choose to carry ourselves, with kindness, with patience, with steady strength. So if today's feeling heavy, just breathe. You are not alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, your quiet strength is leading the way for someone else.